Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is probably the most requested video I've ever had in a very, very long time. In all of my comment sections for likely the last 6 months now, there has been one simple question, something so invasive that honestly I put in more time just to get my research done on them than most of my other videos. This singular question has been haunting my dreams for long enough, and it's time to answer the simple question of when space sharks. Well, my little gremlos, it is time for space sharks. I'm going to break down their lore, give my opinions, a few weird stories from my past, and then also discuss some oddities about them. And yes, we will be discussing him at length. Regardless, I want you all to sit back, relax, and try to enjoy this video. It's going to be a long one, and in general, with all the reading I had to do for a single Space Marine chapter, it goddamn better well be a long video to justify the length, to secure the bag, and also promote something I actually enjoyed quite a lot. I do have a sponsor for this video, someone who has been here at least once. You know him and you love him. Let's talk about War Thunder for just a second before going into the Carcharodons, shall we? Quick question. Do you like tanks, fighter jets, warships, absurd levels of detail in war games? Considering you're watching this video, I'd wager the answer is yes. And if so, you should play War Thunder, a free-to-play, pulse-pounding, top-tier military multiplayer action game. Having the best graphics in wargaming, always improving, they just added ray tracing, and my eyes weep at the sight of the APFSDS coming directly at the cockpit of my tank. Which matters, by the way, because if you didn't know, the vehicles are not just stats with wheels and a gun. They are individually modeled parts connected together to make it so that each interaction in the game is a unique adrenaline-fueled encounter with levels of immersion so intense that no two battles are the same. With the new Hornet Sting update, a whole heap of content has been either added or updated based on player feedback. Like the gameplay of naval battles has been massively overhauled, and a bunch of new jets have been added, like the FA-18 and the SU-30. Needless to say, now is the best time to get into War Thunder, so of course, I have a gift for all new players, as well as anyone who hasn't touched the game in over half a year. Just click my link in the description to download War Thunder on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox. Doing so will get you a special gift of 100,000 Silver Lions, a special decorator, the Eagle of Valor, and a bunch more. You can also completely immerse yourself in War Thunder Mobile for free on iOS or Android using my link in the description. Thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. The Carcharodons, the Space Sharks, the Pale Hunters, the weirdest chapter and likely the most fan-favorite non-standard chapter in the setting. The reason, they're just weird. Not in like an eccentric kind of way, more so in they break a lot of the cardinal rules that Space Marines tend to follow, but for some reason they do it in such a cool way that no one really cares that much. Like, they are aggressively melee focused in terms of a chapter and devout to the Emperor, but they are also incredibly silent in how they go about it. They have the discipline of a stealthy chapter, but the execution of the Black Templars if they merge with the Flesh Terrors, and that's the best way to see them. They're an especially violent monster of a chapter. But what are the basics of what we know about them? Well, the short end of it, they are basically one of the weirder chapters in that they are a predation fleet, where they essentially migrate around the sector in a bully fleet of ships in different numbers, depending on the difficulty of the location that they're in, which, by the way, they're in the Outer Dark, which is pretty bad, and usually the fighting ends up being against Tyranids, I mind you, but not being afraid to take up arms against damn near anything else that's in there as well. They kind of just get around a lot. They do technically have a homeworld, but it's complicated. Once we get into their history, and especially the Bad App War, we will talk about that, but for now we're just going to be covering the basics of what you need to know to understand the chapter from a top-down current perspective. Like, the stuff you need to understand just to kind of get by. So, in as simplest terms as humanly possible, the Carcharodons Astra, the Space Sharks, they are the ultimate make-do with what we we have chapter of Marines, pretty much in the history of this universe. With almost no access to resources, they are probably one of the most resourceful chapters around. They abstain from contemporary resources as a means of penance for a crime we don't fully understand, but I could take a few guesses. In order to restock on serfs, chapter candidates, weapons, armor, and just basic supplies, they partake in two almost ritualistic set of rites. Something that they say is their God-given right, but it's more they just use that as an excuse for people not to question the 7 to 8 foot tall men that show up covered in gore, and that is the Grey Tithes and the Red Tithes. They're pretty fucking radical names, but the Grey Tithe is where they hunt down archaeotech wherever they go, stealing it from any planet they can find. And they use this archaeotech as a bartering chip with the tech priests of Mars in order to secure new war gear through a pact that is officially sealed under the name of the F you pay me decree of M34. Though, due to this being a bit limited in scope, the chapter is often pretty protective of old war gear, and they are also usually down to the wire with the shittiest patterns of power armor they could get their hands on, mismatched and very heavily augmented in order to work, with none of their suits of power armor being 100% working all the time, usually being equipped with Mark V Heresy plate, which is, if you don't know much about it, it's kind of the worst one. I think it does provide them with a cool look, and it does lead to them having some weird-ass weapon and armor mashups. Like, their Relic Terminator armors are described as being pretty damn decorated, but still being mismatched, caked in scars and battle damage that has only been loosely repaired. The First Company veterans, that usually wear them, by the way, are known as the Red Brethren. It doesn't really mean that they're actually red or have any red decorations. It's actually kind of funny because they end up going into the battlefield clean as a whistle and then leaving so thoroughly caked in gore and viscera that you'd think at first sight, just from the color alone, that they're a Blood Angel successor. But yeah, all their gear is more or less ancient by default. But also alongside that, you have the Red Tithe, I mentioned, which is the more discussed about tithe, as there is a book written about it. It's the tithe that they conduct when they basically just need to abduct a small world's population without telling anyone. They get bodies, and that's all that matters. Serfs, potential battle brothers, servants, and so on, so forth. It's pretty neat. They usually raid places that are far out of Imperial aid, so that when they do it, they don't have to worry about an Inquisitor showing up, and if they do, it'll happen later. In the book Red Tithe, that's basically the entire principle of the plot, albeit there is a bit more at stake, like an untainted psyker, but you know, we get there later. Regardless, these two means of stealing to sell and stealing people can be considered morally reprehensible, and well, you're right, but in a very Night Lord's way of going about this, the ends do justify the means here, as they are damn good at their job. They're one of the most important tools to fight off the horrors of the Outer Dark, and because of that, they kind of just need to do what they do. They have strict codes of honor, but the honor itself doesn't really extend to humanity, more just a respect to their own disciplines and doctrines that are almost 100% in their chapter. So if you're not in their chapter, they don't really give a shit about you. And hell, unless you're a fully blooded battle brother, you are probably going to barely even be recognized as a living entity that breathes. And that comes down to the fact that, like, if you are not tough enough to become a fully blooded battle brother, you are not really going to be cut out for this, because you're going to be put through scenarios that are going to likely test you. It's actually a common practice in the chapter that if you are a scout or a member of the scout company, until you have fully blooded yourself in several different campaigns, meaning killed several people, monsters, or what have you during a campaign, you are not even allowed a name. You are given a designation. That is it, a numbered code with sigils and symbols to represent who you are. The second you cross this kind of threshold to be considered a tough enough dude that you could potentially be a worthwhile battle brother, you are given what is referred to as a void name, which is your new name that's inherent to the chapter's culture. So these names are written in High Gothic, and it's kind of interesting to mention the High Gothic part of things because the entirety of the chapter doesn't speak Low Gothic, and they barely speak regular High Gothic. They speak an archaic form of High Gothic, and for those of you who don't know, the best way to see High Gothic and Low Gothic, the difference is that Low Gothic Gothic is basically like speaking English. It is a butchered language that is simplistic and easy to understand, while High Gothic is like speaking Latin. It's the root of a lot of different languages, and it's not as easy to understand, but the Carcharodons speak an ancient dialect of High Gothic, and it's said to be such a formal way of speaking that when people actually try and speak with them, it's described as they're speaking like they're narrating an instructions manual from some ancient text. It kind of gives them a more mechanical feel in nature to how they act and speak. So people who speak with them, even if they speak High Gothic, sometimes have trouble understanding them just because of how old it is. The reason this is very interesting, though, as with most of 40k, is it's kind of unconfirmed. Why? I'll give you my reason why. I know why, but it's later. We'll cover it in the history. I'm just trying to keep these sections divided. I'm baiting the hook, I know. But if there's one thing I'm good at, it's being pedantic and faffing about so much that people start to get frustrated. And, yeah, outside of the basics of their tithes and lifestyles, the Space Sharks' combat tactics are probably one of the reasons people think they're so cool. They are just so incredibly violent. It's actually described as being close in scale to the more unhinged members of the Blood Angel successors in just how absolutely violent it is. They crash on people like a tsunami and shred them to pieces like some kind of oceanic predator. They decorate their weapons and armor with different fish accoutrements similar to that of like a shark or some other underwater fish predator. Though usually it is the, shark motif, because, GW has to be on the nose about damn near everything. This goes all the way down to their close ranged weapons, where, say, their chain axes and chain swords, which is what they're preferred, are often modified that they do not have the hook-bladed teeth, like the Mica Dragon teeth that the standard chain swords have. They actually customize them to be a serrated edge that is more pointed and triangular in shape. It's similar to that of a shark's tooth, obviously, which is fucking awesome. They prefer to attack similar to that of a great ocean predator. They swim in, take a chunk out, and then if it grievously injures them, they go in for the kill. But if they see that they don't have an immediate advantage, they back away and then adjust in order to strike again. It's this sort of strike and fade technique that's taken to almost the most violent possible conclusion. It's very much shock troop tactics, but especially more violent and gruesome. They do so while being completely silent, by the way. There is no chanting battle hymns. There is simply the silence of the void as they come in like sharks and then just strike. They are an incredibly disciplined force of Marines as well, being able to control themselves due to a genetic curse known as the blindness that affects almost every single one of their members, which isn't the only genetic curse. Their bodies over time get covered in scales. Their eyes turn black like that of a doll's. Weirdly enough, people draw them a lot with shark teeth. This is kind of a misnomer. The shark teeth isn't actually a mutation that they undergo. It's more of a cultural thing. They actually sharpen their teeth and carve them down so that they have the point, sometimes even getting their entire jaws replaced with metal chompers to be closer to their, DeviantArt fish sona. So, with the basics of the chapter out of the way, let's switch gears a bit and touch upon history, the blindness, and where they started, or at least the most widely recognized location of where they started. And, speaking of, where did they start? As far as history goes for the Carcharodons, we don't know too much. The thing you all need to understand is that 2/3 of their lore is pretty much wrapped up in any supplement involving the Badab War, as well as any Imperial Armory book, which, on either side of that spectrum, is basically just an especially large codex entry with very weird tidbits of lore. And I will say, I love codex entries. They're really fun ways to get a brief idea of what something is in the lore, but they're there to gas up whatever they're talking about, which, yeah, it's cool, but it's not really a good source of unbiased information. No. So the other third of the info that we have is in the disparate novels we have about the various different adventures with the Carcharodons, which is both more than you'd expect, still less than you'd hope. It gives us a bit of a framework to understand them a little bit more. And from their perspective, they are penitents who were sent into exile thousands of years ago. They assume they were from the Sentinel founding, which I'm just going to tell you is just a fucking wrong. That's just incorrect, at least from my perspective, though looking it up online, a lot of people seem to have the same opinion of me when it comes to that specific conclusion. Their origins tie into a very weird theory, that they are somehow related to the Night Lords, which is fucking bullshit, wacky malarkey, though I get where it comes from. See, it's a common trope in the Horus heresy that Corvus Corax and the Night Haunter were often compared, especially on the side of their legion, as they both kind of represent very similar ideas in how to prosecute wars. See, the Raven Guard use a form of fear tactic when they engage in wars with others, while the Night Lords are, basically doing the same thing, just a little bit more gusto involved in causing fear and pain. Both like stealth, both like jump packs, both do melee, both seem to enjoy their jobs, with the Night Lords enjoying it enough to make us all a little bit uncomfortable if they start talking about it. So, it's pretty obvious people tend to compare them, which is why when people say that the Carcharodon Astra are Night Lord stock, it's because they do the whole ultra-violence thing like them, more so than the stealthy thing like the Raven Guard. But I'm sorry to dispel this myth, but that's bullshit and a poopy bad thing. These boys are 100% Raven Guard. Hell, the theory that they are partially made from the gene seed of world eaters makes more sense to me, to be honest. But yeah, the reason why they are so violent is often overlooked, and it's a gene seed curse that the Raven Guard suffer. Not many people talk about it because it's not nearly as glamorous as the other ones, but comically enough, the Raven Guard have a very similar curse to that of the Blood Angels, where their Marines will, if pushed too far in a combat scenario, or sometimes just for no reasons, just go berserk. It's a lot more sullen than the Black Rage and a little bit more stable, but the Sable brand causes their gene seed to become hyper-processed. Their skin turns almost luminescent white to match Corvus Corax, their eyes turn black as pitch if they weren't already, and an urge to do nothing but kill fills them in as efficient and meaningful a way as possible. They are a bit more coherent than those who fall to the Black Rage, like I was saying, but these individuals mercilessly slaughter who they deem as any enemy, which more often than not is a lot of people. Unlike the Black Rage, they can come back from the Sable brand through many different methods. It was practiced during the Horus Heresy, or at least pre-Horus Heresy, how to make it go away, and there was like mixed success, so they just allowed you to choose whichever one worked for you. Meditation, seclusion, or just full-on engaging in your most brutal urges brought about by the Sable brand. I don't know, whatever works, man. Though it is often taught to individuals who are afflicted with the Sable brand to weaponize it. Thus, the Shadow Killers were born, but that's a topic for another day. They may not be a regular man anymore. They have kind of fallen to the base urges, but they can still be of use to the chapter just because of how much more violent they can be. So they also are encouraged to use a mixture of discipline and combat so that they're able to basically harness these urges while they're trying to get them out. Make the battle lust work for the chapter rather than have them be a liability like a lot of the Death Company would be for the Blood Angels. Now, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to sound like I'm saying I told you so, but that sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it? Intense battle lust and extreme discipline. Okay, I'll just say it in simpler terms that even the babies at the back can understand. The Carcharodon Astra are, if flesh terrors, but Raven Guard. They were fostering the genetic curse of the Sable brand to the point where almost every single individual member of the Carcharodons manifest their version of it. Though with the Carcharodons, it's actually referred to as the blindness, where they are just always angry all the time. With this out of the way, where did the Carcharodons actually come from, and why do they have such a weird coping mechanism to deal with this, and why do they call it the blindness? It's unconfirmed, but it's unconfirmed in the way a lot of things in 40k are, like with the Soul Drinkers, how most people don't really even consider them an Imperial Fist successor, even though it's like almost 100% been confirmed in lore, just not stated out directly. Long story short, there's just a flag that they found, and the flag had a thing like the Champion of Blades test where all of the greatest fighters in all of the Imperial Fist chapters show up, fight, and it's usually the Black Templar guy that walks away with the black sword. Yeah, that, and they found a Soul Drinker guy on the banner from like thousands of years ago, so it just basically confirmed that they're an Imperial Fist successor. But it didn't specifically say that that was a soul drinker, so it could totally have not have been. That's not how that works, but like, okay, but like, when I say the Carcharodons were a chapter of Marines that were totally formed of the exiled Terran Marines that were considered to be too mean, it basically checks off all the boxes that you need to for this to be canon. Because, you know, competitive disregard for human life, theft of people, keeping slaves, shit that, although isn't current era Raven Guard, was very much pre-Corax era Raven Guard, with them being especially impressive. And they constantly talk about being exiled by someone they hold in great reverence. It almost feels like they've deified Corax and feel like they need to earn his respect back. But I don't know. Basically, literally what the Raven Guard would be if Corax didn't teach them how to harness the Sable brand the way that they normally do in the Raven Guard now. Instead, just kind of left them to figure it out, which they didn't. They just let it show up and somehow harnessed it as a weapon. So since they were exiled, they formed their own incredibly unique chapter culture around it, fostered their own mutations and such. It's one of the easiest to intuit chapter origins, to be completely honest. But regardless, this has led them to a long history of nomadic and horrid violence perpetrated against the likes of, well, damn near anything that exists in the Outer Dark. But also, the thing that kinda got them into the mainstream eye was the Bad Ab War. Yeah, we're gonna kinda talk about that a little bit. It was a bit of a big deal. I want to do a Bad Ab video at some point. It's just there's so many disparate sources to kind of put together to understand it. But regardless, they were one of the chapters that was on the Loyalist side during that conflict. Though mostly operating independently from the rest of the Marines, they did kind of still focus on that singular purpose of killing every last traitor that they possibly could. Though I would be remiss to not mention their, for some reason, especially horrendously no good zero karma hatred of the Mantis Warriors, which were a successor of the Marauders, which are a successor of the White Scars. Yeah, it's complicated. So the Mantis Warriors had sworn an honor debt to the Astro Claws, and for a little bit thought they were doing the right thing. That was until the fucking sharks showed up and started twisting heads off like they were Snapple caps and yanking arms off like they were rip-starting a lawnmower. Yeah, precision stealth chapter with guerrilla tactics is not gonna really do much against the pace of the fucking unga bunga I play Saul bad guy level tactics that the Carcharodons were gonna do. Like, for real, the Mantis Warriors would be setting up sniper positions, and there would always just be a single Carcharodon about 20 feet away seeing the execution prompt from a God of War game hovering above their head. It's fucking bloodbath, man. It was horrendous. With much of the chapter of the Mantis Warriors being wiped out, and after they surrendered, reasonably, I believe, is, you know, they don't want to die and get wiped out. They did admit that they were wrong and didn't wish to die with the Astro Claws as they saw what they were turning into. So they admitted that, went on a penance crusade, which they survived somehow, which you never really hear about that. And then, as another part of their penance, they had to give up their homeworld of Uthaka to the Carcharodons for recruitment and whatnot, which is what I mentioned earlier when I said that the Carcharodons do have a bit of a weird world that they can draw from, but from what I can tell, they still prefer to be a nomad predation who's a what's it, so they tend to sail the stars and do horrible big nasty whatevers for wherever they go. Also, I'm just gonna say it, the Space Sharks and the Carcharodons are probably the same chapter. If you didn't know, the original printing of the chapters of the Bad Ab War to tell you how to paint different chapters, there was a chapter that looked almost identical to the Carcharodons, with albeit a different but comedic logo, and they were just called the Space Sharks. And yeah, they're just the Carcharodons, which, okay, Carcharodon Astra literally translates to Space Sharks. GW just retconned the logo to make it a little bit more respectable. It's not that hard to understand. So with the basics of their history out of the way, and me bitching a little bit about the Mantis Warriors along the way, let's cover some of the cultural basics of their chapter, and wrap this up by talking about him soon enough. He is the last thing we need to bring up. I just need to bait the hook here, you know, a bit more, because the capital H, him, is one of the coolest fucking Space Marines in the entire setting, period. So, if you know, you know, but we will be getting there. Patience. The culture of the Carcharodons under a microscope is pretty interesting, as their entire shtick kind of revolves around one singular concept and its derivatives, which is silence. They are predators who prefer the silence of the void above all else, and because of this, it leads them to base all of their actions around the idea of being quiet. Sure, they are overly aggressive and tend to use weapons that make a lot of noise, more so than, the other options available to them, but they themselves tend to put a lot of stock in ritualistic meditation that leads to personal silence. And it also comes with long days of contemplation. The sort of silence that is found inside of them can be kind of seen as the same silence that is found in the Sisters of Silence. My god, that's a lot of sibilants. They actively have to find that sort of void inside them, this spot where they hear, see, and feel nothing. This numbness is used to still their bloodlust caused by the blindness, their weird genetic curse. They have long periods of meditation caused by their cryosleep. It also allows them to develop their minds, which is cool. I do put a lot of stock into meditation myself, as meditation is one of those things where you kind of need to disconnect from the world around you and focus on particular topics that you need to think of for yourself rather than have the background noise of daily life kind of pollute your thoughts in that way. I think it's really important. I think the chapter's obsession with silence is probably the way they found to conquer the Sable brand, without Corvus Corax being around, obviously. And to some degree, it worked, but it works in the same way the Flesh Terrors deciding to say "F it" and just let the Black Rage do its thing kind of worked for them. It works, but only kind of. These individuals are the only chapter I can think of that I can consider mindful berserkers. They are savage brutes, but are deeply aware of their every action. Only the freshest of the Battle Brothers are in less control of this sort of battle lust that they have, and thus why they're not even given names until they can prove that they are able to control themselves properly. This is a chapter that sees rage showing itself as an incredible weakness. When it comes to combat and, murdering other enemies, it has to be dealt with the same way you would a task that you're not exactly excited for. Compassionless efficiency. Like a predator hunting for food in the endless depths of the ocean, they aren't angry at what they have to do, they simply kill and eat in order to survive. Which is why their chapter master, certified wide load Tyberos, is one of the coolest chapter masters in the goddamn setting. Yeah, it's time we start talking about the he now. Tyberos is held in such a mythical status in the Warhammer community, and for good fucking reason. This dude standing a little taller than your standard Primaris Marine as a firstborn is pretty big. Now, I know that there's a common myth that they use dreadnought plating to reinforce his Terminator armor, but that's never really been confirmed. But regardless, his special relic Terminator armor is actually pretty damn intimidating when you see it due to its sheer size. Tyberos goes by the title The Red Wake for a reason, and that's because of so many factors that listing them off would take so while, so let's skim a few off the top and, lightning round this shit. 1. By weight class. Without armor, he is probably the largest Space Marine in the setting right now. Although, maybe not the tallest, he does have a weird amount of heft and width to him by a large margin. 2. His Terminator armor is heavily modified. It seems to be almost 100% custom built for him due to his size and shape, and thus makes the armor incredibly rare in and of its own right, but it's also made from archaeotech and just a bunch of random plates that seem to no longer be able to be produced anymore. So his Terminator armor, in theory, is stronger than the strongest pattern of Terminator armor that was ever produced, like Saturnine power armor. 3. His weapons, Hunger and Slake, kind of overkill, TBH. They are a double stack, Power Fist, Lightning Claws, and Chain Fist all wrapped into 2 hands. They are quite literally the most fucking over-the-top weapons I've seen in the history of this setting. This dude literally found a way to make a practical approach of Zahando from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4 in melee. It's fucking insane. Considering how large this boy is, he could just swipe his hand in your general direction and then there'd just be a smear and some sludge on the ground where you were. 4. He actually somehow finds a way to be stealthy. It probably has to do with that whole wraith slipping, shadow bender, whatever ability that comes with being a member of the Raven Guard, being able to slip in and out of perception psychically, but the idea of what is essentially a super heavy tank showing up out of nowhere. And honestly, with how big this dude is and how resilient he is, he should not be, number 5, weirdly fast he is. He doesn't really need to do much. He just needs to just appear in the middle of a melee and then run in a straight line at anyone he doesn't like until they are dead. He could just Superman fight people, walking through them until they explode. He's one of the best examples of the chapter's distilled image. It goes without saying, but the symbology here is pretty evident. The people without names, the Scout Marines, the 10th Company of the Carcharodons, can be seen as minnows. These sharks without names that don't really do much of the fighting, and they're not really that frightening. The fully blooded Battle Brothers are obviously the larger sharks, like great whites. They are large, terrifying predators that, regardless of who you are, they are seen as immensely scary, even by the standards of the large Space Marine chapters out there. They are a horrible threat, and are basically singular in how dangerous they are due to the whole mindfulness and berserkerness of them. But Tyberos is in a league of his own. Thus, if you could consider him as a predator or a shark of some sorts, you'd have to become something primordial, a leviathan, or probably in this case, a megalodon, a species of marine that doesn't really exist anymore. He's just different. I know that people say that his claws are likely old Primarch weapons, but I don't know, maybe? I don't see it. I don't know if it's ever been confirmed anywhere. I might have missed it. You know, I have to read books a couple times before I absorb all the info, so like, could be that. I think the part about Tyberos that I hold in the highest degree of reverence is a highly specific qualifier I should note, but no matter how injured, no matter how many of his battle brothers have died, he will only ever speak in a whisper loud enough to be picked up by his suit's vox. As the top of the food chain, the apex predator exemplifies the key concept I mentioned before: silence, but also control. He probably is immensely affected by the genetic issues that plague the space sharks, but he refuses to yield to them. He is so in control of himself, he is almost Primarch tier, I would say, in terms of combat effectiveness. I honestly would pay to see him fight other chapter masters in like a battle royale, specifically Asterion Malak, but that is wishful thinking. Regardless, thank you all for watching, and I hope this video was everything you wanted. And please, for the love of all that is holy, for f***'s sake, you can stop asking for space sharks now. It's finally here, and I might cover more of them in the future. I do want to go and make an entire video about chapter masters and discuss them at length, because I think that they're a really interesting idea. What do I mean by that? Well, I don't know, stay tuned. Anyhow, let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know what you want to see in the future as well. And also, let me know if I missed anything, because I'll definitely be looking. Alongside that, if you liked the video, remember to like the video. If you like me, remember to subscribe, because, you know, starting to pick up steam again. I kind of want to keep the ball rolling, you know? Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. And if you want to support me, my editors, as well as just make sure that I have the motivation to get out of bed in the morning and produce content for this channel, then become a channel member today. You gain access to a few perks if you do too, which is always pretty nice. Thank you all again for watching. Until next time, I stand by my personal ideology that we should bring back the old Space Sharks logo. Look at that fella. I like him. Thanks once again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video.